The Feuerstein method has been integrated into school curriculum in many schools around the world. Thousands of children and teachers have benefited from applying the proven concept of structural cognitive modifiability and mediated learning. It is a very systematic cognitive skills program which teaches the children to think for themselves and be autonomous learners. I now call upon Dr. Jean Zare to introduce us to Feuerstein methodology and its history. The stage is all yours, ma'am.
So I come from the other India. It's called Indiana. And it was a little testy getting here. We weren't sure about the security of the skies, but thank God was able to arrive here very early yesterday morning. And Onita and I are very privileged to be able to present to you today this life-changing method that I found 25 years ago. And my first invitation to India came from Lalitha Ramanujan. If you've not met Lalitha yet, you'll want to know her. She is a trainer of the program here in India. And so, yes, I hope you'll have an opportunity to meet her as well. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of history of where this amazing method came from. I was a teacher in a school with children with a lot of poverty and a lot of trauma. And I watched a webinar, and there was this man that was very different from all the other men and women that were on a panel. They were child psychologists from some of the big schools in America, like Yale and Harvard and Columbia and Princeton. Then there was this one guy at the end named Feuerstein. And I'm like, who is this guy? As I listened, what I heard was a message of hope like I had never heard before. In all my years, all of the college courses I had taken, I had never experienced anything quite like what Feuerstein delivered. So I went, I got to find out more about this guy. Now, this was in the 1990s. Some of you might remember we didn't have Google. Do you remember when there was no Google? But we had internet, so I was able to do some searching, and I was able to find that I could go to Chicago. So for me, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Chicago is only about a 3.5-hour drive. So every summer, a wonderful speech pathologist that was at the school with me, her name is Cindy, she and I drove to Chicago every summer. And you know, when you attend a training, the first hour, the first day, and you know you're in, this is it. I'm going to do this the rest of my life. So I was in a very large public school system with 10,000 children. And later I became a school principal right after meeting the Feuerstein method. I became a principal, and I had 500 children. And my teachers slowly started learning about this method that I became a trainer in. So here's a gentleman, his name is Nick, and I encountered the Feuerstein program with the intention of helping children. And as I started exploring the program, I realized it helps all of us. Any age, at any time. So this is Nick, and he was in a very terrible motorcycle accident he hit so hard that the helmet even broke. So his brain injury was pretty significant. And as you see him there, he looks fine, but he knows that he couldn't remember anything. His short-term memory was about 0. And so he heard that I did this program because I was at his kid's school. He said, you got to help me. You got to help me. So he was married, had children, but his wife made all the decisions. So Nick and I started every Sunday. We called it our own version of Sunday school. I met him. We went to the same church. And for 90 minutes every Sunday, he and another man I found at the church that had had a brain injury when he was 11. He was on his bicycle riding to baseball practice, was hit by a pickup truck. So here's these two 40-year-old fathers with 20 years since their brain injury, and we saw significant change. And that kind of rocked my world. I'm like, okay, this isn't just for children to get better grades in school. This is for you and for me. Because when I sat through that first training, I started recognizing what I needed to work on. So we know this came from Israel, and it's been in about 40 different countries. I've been in a few of them to help train and visit. I have visited, my last count is I'm somewhere around 35 different countries I've been to. My husband is so happy I'm retired, but I'm not home a lot. So he loves having me home. He's an avid gardener. He's a wonderful support and a lovely man. I hope you get to meet him sometime. He's amazing. And he's one of the reasons I'm here. So behind every good woman, there's a good man, right? Yes. We have over 1,000 research studies. My own PhD dissertation was on the topic, of course, of Feuerstein. But we also have thousands of other studies that have been done. Now they're in many, many languages. They're not all in Hebrew or English. They come in Italian and Portuguese. So many different countries, many different research studies. You can start as young as about 4, but honestly, you can mediate infants as well. The story began with the liberation of Auschwitz on January 27, 1945. Across Europe, there were about 250 concentration camps, and many of them held mostly Jewish children, teenagers, and adults. Teenagers were brought to Israel, were put under the guidance of Reuven Feuerstein, a very young psychologist at the time. So these are the Russian soldiers who asked for special permission to be the ones to free Auschwitz. Some of the faces that you see in that upper left picture are Holocaust survivors who are still alive today. Reuven was in a very unique situation. He was in a melting pot. There were people, children, coming from all over the world to Israel as a new country, and he was able to observe mothers and their children, teachers and students, rabbis and pupils, and he wanted to understand what is the best way that the human brain learns. This is Reuven as I got to know him, born around 1921 and passed away in 2014. All of us in the Feuerstein world know exactly where we were the day we got that email that he had passed away. A great genius left us. I had the honor of writing one of the many letters to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so twice we nominated Reuven for that auspicious award. And I just discovered about a year ago that he did make the finalist. So very, very proud of that. If any of you have had any psychology training, and I know we probably have counselors, psychologists in our midst today, that you probably studied Freud and perhaps Piaget. Reuven also would have studied both, but he particularly knew Piaget. He was Piaget's student. I was Reuven's student. So that puts me 2 steps from Piaget. Isn't that crazy? It's just that I'm old, so that's why that works that way. But Reuven was fluent in about 10 or 12, I've heard both numbers, languages. Piaget was famous in his time. People were coming from all over the world to learn from Piaget. And he would say, somebody go get Reuven. And Reuven would come and translate into Italian or Hebrew or Romanian or English or French or Italian. And so he was very much a genius. And Reuven took Piaget's amazing theories, and I like to say blew them up, applied them. Reuven was a psychologist, so his method, I like to say, is applied psychology. And it was his wish that teachers would be trained to use the program in schools. And that has happened around the world. But my 25 years working with the program, I'm also advocating clinics, homes, small schools. Anyone can be trained in this program. Ironically enough, Reuven did not demand that you have letters behind your name, that you have a certain degree to take the training. So when I hold a Feuerstein training, I could have a psychologist, a third grade teacher, and a mother, and a speech pathologist, and an occupational therapist, all in the same training. And let me tell you, I love that because everybody brings their particular expertise to the table. We know that Piaget identified stages, and I'm not going to go into these just so that you can see them again, because if you studied Piaget, you're now remembering, oh yeah, something about the sensory motor stage, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational. This was brilliant work that Piaget did that Reuven learned from. But Reuven took that and then operationalized it, created a system so that the intellectual development could be promoted. Piaget just recognized what happens with children when they have an enriched environment and they're learning on their own, much like Maria Montessori. Reuven was working with Holocaust survivors, children, teenagers that had been horrifically traumatized in concentration camps. And he knew they were very, very bright children, but we needed to get their thinking back. Feuerstein's foundational theory, as you heard already, was called structural cognitive modifiability. Skinner was the first that said, you know, children learn by a response to a stimulus. Oh, the stove is hot. I will not touch the stove again. And then along came Piaget, and he talked about the age and the developmental stage of the organism. He was a scientist, not a very nice word to call a child, but whatever. He used organism. And then along came Reuven Feuerstein and said, no, there's one more important part to this equation, and that is the human mediator. The human mediator could be a parent, a teacher, a friend, a counselor, a psychologist who gets in between the stimulus and the response and helps mediate that stimulus so that it is more meaningful to the child and that they can understand it better. Simple, but profound. Reuven, when he used the word structural, was referring to psychological structures. Like when you're highly motivated to learn something, you're going to focus. And when you are focused, then you're going to remember more. So motivation is a psychological structure. So is focus, and so is memory. And so Reuven was wanting to impact those. And Piaget's theory proposed that we develop schemas, which are like mental frameworks. And so Reuven took that work. Freud proposed an id, ego, and superego as components of the personality that interact to create behavior. Reuven just took a little different approach, and that's the cognitive. And like this day title insinuates, it's the missing piece. Teachers, you remember school, right? Good or bad memories? You remember your teachers were all about what you needed to learn. You needed to learn how to read, how to write, how to do math. Yes, very, very important. But rarely do teachers have any method for you for how to learn. And when I discovered this, I'm like, where's this been my whole life? This is amazing. And then I started studying the brain. And so now I am an official brain nerd. I love to learn about how the brain works. Reuven also lived long enough to discover neuroplasticity and that it fit perfectly with his theory of structural cognitive modifiability. So we know now that we're talking about the structure of neurons. So on the left, you see an impoverished neuron, a child that maybe lives in poverty, doesn't have a lot of toys, no one reads to them, they don't have many books. We have children like this in America, as you do in India, as exists all over the world. But if a child can have an enriched environment, a lot of language spoken to him and with him, a lot of books, a lot of toys, and they don't have to be lots, but that they are mediated, that there's somebody who is taking the time to get down on the floor with that baby or toddler or child and really exploring it with them. So this is a powerful handout that I've loved. Nature needs nurture, the right kind. And then you're going to have incredibly better outcomes for our children. There are about 86 billion neurons. Every neuron has the capability of 1,000 to 10,000 connections. That's crazy. And it only takes up 3% of our body mass, but it uses 20% of your calorie intake every day. The brain is a greedy little thing. It needs a lot of nourishment. And so you are what you eat. So you do need to pay attention about what goes into your body because it can affect your thinking. This is Kanmani. She's a student, and I've been to Lalitha's Alpha to Omega school twice. And I was there over a year ago, went back just last January. Kanmani saw me and immediately came up. And the first thing she said to me was, "Yes, Dr. Zaire, the brain can change." Of all things for her to remember, that made an impact. When I work with students and teachers in training, I hope I get to train you someday, or Lalitha will, I like to make a model of a neuron. And so everybody use, those pipe cleaners, those fuzzy little craft sticks. We make a model of a neuron, even if you're 5 years old or you're 35 years old, to discover that if I grow more dendrites, I now have more connections so my brain can learn more. Well, I built a model with Kanmani and her classmates. That's what she remembered. That's what stuck with her. My brain can grow. The cognitive part of Reuven's theory is just referring to conscious intellectual activity, such as thinking, reasoning, remembering what we're doing today together as we learn together. This is Nishant, and he was also a student, and this is his mother. And I worked with several students for a full day at Alpha to Omega in January. And when Reuven talked about modifiability, he was talking more than just change for the moment. He meant permanent alterations and improvement in cognition. When children go through a year or even a few months of Feuerstein, they often come back and remark, "That was different. That changed my thinking. That's what I needed." Learning begins with the belief that every child is capable of learning. I'm guessing we say in America we're preaching to the choir. I'm guessing you're here because you already believe that. Give me a thumbs up if you already believe that. You got that right? Yes. You know that we've got to believe deeply within our very core that this child is capable of learning more, whether they're just rolling around on the floor, throwing a little tantrum, or they have no speaking language and you don't know what's inside because they don't speak. But I've worked with children like this and am delightfully surprised, but I shouldn't be, as we mediate and demand lovingly a little more from them than no one has ever expected before, we see the change. And it's a beautiful thing to behold. Reuven was a man on a mission and with great passion. So once you met him, you never forgot him. And he didn't forget you either. I ran into him at an airport and I said, "Oh, Professor, I'm so happy to be at this conference with you." I said, "I'm Jeannie Zaire." He goes, "I know who you are." I'm like, wow, I'd only met him, like a couple times, but he never forgot. He never forgot anybody. This is an example of a group of people that I train. And so in this group, there is an occupational therapist. There is 2 occupational therapists, actually. There's a retired school teacher. There's a mother. She just has a son that has very neurodiverse. They never gave him a label. And that's the beautiful thing about Feuerstein. We do not require a diagnosis. Often when a family, parents leave a doctor's office or a psychologist's office and they've received a devastating diagnosis, your child has cerebral palsy, your child was born with spina bifida, your child has Down syndrome, your child has ADHD, oh yes, your child definitely is on the autism spectrum. Parents can feel very devastated. Well, what do we do? Well, in the Feuerstein world, we're like, don't worry about that diagnosis. No matter where your child is today, we have a method and a way for him to make progress. So don't get hung up in the diagnosis, because sometimes that limits our expectations of the child when you hear the label that has been applied to them. For about 60 years, the Feuerstein program had 2 big programs that we trained the most, called Basic and Standard. And about a month ago, we decided it was time for a rebranding. So what used to be called Basic, those of you that know this program, is now called Cognitive Key. It's about unlocking learning potential. So it can be used with children as young as 4 up through 9 for typical developing children. But for children that have any type of neurodiversity, you can use the program, many of them, there's like 12 of them. You can use them all the way into adulthood. So these are what we call Feuerstein tools now, formerly known as instrumental enrichment. But believe it or not, we had too many people that thought, oh, is this about music? No, it's not about music. So we decided we better get cognitive into the name of our program so that people understood this is about cognition. Cognitive enrichment is then the one that was first designed by Reuven because he was working with teenagers. So the program originally known as Standard is now called Cognitive Enrichment. And it was a program I walked into, took my first training, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go learn this program so I can help my students. I was a teacher, and it only took me a couple days to realize, oh, wait a minute, I need this program too. This isn't just about the kids I teach. I can help my brain to learn better and more efficiently. I think the word efficiency is a really good one to think about with Reuven Feuerstein's work, is we help your brain to be able to become even more efficient. So this cognitive enrichment, we're going to explore this in a little bit. Hopefully you got a packet of tools in another session later today. I'm going to actually walk you through some of those pages and introduce you to some people in the crowd that are already trained. And this is about maximizing. Every child, every adult already has a good IQ, has a learning potential, but can we grow it? So does it matter if your IQ is 100 and you become an IQ of 120? Whatever. But it can become more efficient for sure. And I'll show you some stories about that as well that were very fascinating. One of the tasks that you're going to explore later this morning is organization of dots. So you see these shapes, and you're going to try to connect dots to make those shapes. Don't start yet. I know some of you, and you love the challenge, and you want to get started. No, not yet. Hold on, because we're going to explain it in a later session, and so you'll know exactly what to do. Cognitive Key, we've given you a couple pages of those, and I would like you to know that those pages are copyrighted and may not be duplicated by you. So these are copyrighted materials, and we're letting you have 1 page of each. The programs have multiple pages and are very deep and wide. If you come to a training, it will be 5 full days. This is not for the faint of heart. You've got to roll up your sleeves and know you really want to dig in to a method that will help yourself as well as help the children or adults that you impact. So Cognitive Key is for predominantly younger children. It's more picture-based, but I've used it with children coming from other countries that want to learn a second language. My city is a refugee resettlement city, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and at one point we had about 5,000 refugees from the country of Burma. And so we had the largest number of Burmese people outside of Burma were in my city in Fort Wayne. And my Burmese students loved this program. It helped them to understand English better as well as the thinking skills that are needed. So this was just a few months ago when I was here. And so do you see Lalitha? She's the one pointing, come on, get over here. Yeah, you can tell she's a leader. She tells people what to do, right? And so in the middle, I want you to notice the tall man in the middle. That is Dr. Lou Failik. He was supposed to be delivering this talk that I'm giving you today. Lou was diagnosed when we went home from India, and he was here. We had such an incredible time. Thank you, Lalitha. And he didn't know he had cancer. He was fine. But the doctors did a checkup. They found it. Another week later, they did more tests. Oh, it's more spread than we thought. We're going to have to give you a very strong dose of chemotherapy. His body went into toxic shock, and 4 days later, he passed away on March 22nd. And so I had to deliver that message to the organizers of this incredible conference. My good friend Lou Failik is not going to be here to give this part. So I'm honored to carry on in his memory, and I dedicate all of my words today to the memory of Dr. Lou Failik. He was the co-author with Reuven Feuerstein, lived in Israel half the year and lived in San Francisco the other half of the year. He was a professor in California. And when he discovered, he was a psychologist, taught psychology. And when he discovered Reuven, as I did, we knew we had kind of found our little pot at the end of the rainbow. This is what I'm going to chase the rest of my life. The other two women that are with Lou, the one in the dark jacket is Daniela Zamboni. She studies the Feuerstein method in Brazil. And then to her right, or your right, is Laura Tallifer, and she's my comrade in Fort Wayne. Another program I want to bring to your attention, I don't know if any of you have any keen interest in helping people as they age to be able to hold on to their ability to memory. I'm seeing some nods, yes. Yes, that would be me. That would be anybody over the age of 65, which is me, that we want to hold on to our ability to remember. So Rafi Feuerstein took over for his father as director of the Feuerstein Institute in Jerusalem, and he has spent the last 5 years creating a new program that I am a trainer for called Thinking Memory. And it actually is not clinical or therapeutic, that it has to be done one-on-one. It's a nice program to do in small groups of 3 or 4 people at a time. Then they don't have to pay as much. You want to make it affordable. They're going to work on time and spatial awareness. They're going to work on everyday problem solving, and they're going to work on social skills and planning, the things that are real for them. So I did this program with 10 people. It's maybe too big of a group, but they were like my trial group from my church, and we had so much fun. We laughed a lot. What I discovered is that people in their 70s and 80s think they're the only one that's having memory issues. Or if I talk about it, my kids will think I'm losing it, or they'll put me in a nursing home in America. We're famous for putting our loved ones in nursing homes. And so they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit it. They're often in a state of denial. And as we sat around the room and discussed it, it brought a lot of hope and joy to them to realize, oh, I'm not alone. And there's things I can do. What? You mean there's methods that can help my memory work? Yes. And we're going to learn them together. I like to use a rocket ship to describe the Feuerstein method. So let me put all three of these people up here. You maybe have read some of Carol Dweck's work. Does that name ring a bell? Yes, growth mindset. So it's been around for many years now, but more schools and more people are looking at it. If you want to read her book, it's wonderful. It's called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. I highly recommend it because it's an easy read, but she explains all of the research that she did to discover that believing that I can become smarter, not that I am smart, because that puts you in a box. But if I can become smarter, that opens up a whole new world. Very, very different. And I went, whoa, this supports Reuven's theory of structural cognitive modifiability. And Onita is also going to share even more about that theory of stimulus and response and how the human mediator gets in between there. So when I discovered Dweck's work, I went, Shazam, this is awesome. This really supports Reuven's work. And then I discovered neuroplasticity, probably 20 years ago, and that Marion Diamond was one of the first researchers in neuroscience using mice and rats and discovering that they grew more dendrites if they got to have toys in their cage, if they got to have another mouse in the cage with them, if they had a friend, they grew more dendrites. If the people who cleaned the cages would hold the mice and pet them, they grew more dendrites. And it took until about the year 2000 when we had enough functional MRI technology that we were able to test human brains and prove she was right. And the first time she presented her findings at a neuroscience conference, she was scorned, much like Reuven was at times. Why do you believe that? The brain can't change, because that's what we thought in the 1980s and the 1990s. And trust me, there are many people out on the street who still don't know about neuroplasticity. We have a tremendous message to deliver that the brain is an incredibly created 3-pound universe that can change. It can be rewired. And we have the ability to help others learn to believe it and to be able to do something about it. So Feuerstein is the rocket ship. It's the bulk of the work that we do. I created a center in my city called the MindCap Center. You're welcome to visit the website. People from all over the world, even people from India, have brought their children to us. You can also take children to a clinic in Jerusalem at the Feuerstein Institute. And now we're getting a couple more opened up in North America. We have one in San Diego, one in Louisiana, and my job now is to help people that have interest in Houston, Atlanta, Chicago, and New York City, possibly Miami, open up centers like the MindCap Center, like the Feuerstein Center in Israel. They will be called Feuerstein Learning Centers. And so if you want one in India, we can talk about that. Maybe we can have one somewhere in India as well. So I highly advocate that you think about Feuerstein as your rocket ship, but we do some front loading, to get those big rockets out of our atmosphere and into the stratosphere. They need rocket boosters. And what I discovered at the MindCap Center is we front load with the children a lot of neuroplasticity and growth mindset, just simple little lessons to help children understand what it means to believe that I can become smarter. And, oh, you mean my brain can change? I can actually grow dendrites, and a myelin sheath can wrap around the axons thicker so messages go faster. I can grow the white matter and the gray matter of my brain. Yes, you can. And by having those two rocket boosters, it helps the Feuerstein method accelerate its progress. So I advocate adding that to it. When Reuven was watching families and teachers in Israel work, he was looking to see what is the human interaction that causes the most structural cognitive modifiability. And he decided to call it mediated learning experience. Mediation means you, as a mediator, get in between the stimulus and the response, and you help mediate it by, do you make it bigger, smaller? Do you talk louder or do you talk softer? Do you change the color? Do you change the size? How can I affect the stimulus so the child can acquire this learning in a more efficient way? We use questions predominantly, even with non-speaking children who don't answer. They may point, they may be able to move a pencil, they may still hear and understand far more than you're giving them credit for. And boy, I had to learn that lesson early in my career. I was a special education teacher working with very impacted children. So we're using questions to help develop what we call autonomous thinkers. Can we think for ourselves? Yes, we can, starting at a very young age. So we ask questions that will help them be a better thinker. So we use what Reuven called intentionality reciprocity. So it's the give and take. I ask a question, I expect an answer. And I'm going to keep looking at you, and I'm going to be smiling, and I'm leaning in, and the child knows I am waiting for your answer and that your answer matters to me. And there's some children have never had this experience. Someone who actually wants to know what I think and what I have to say. Meaning is when we bring our affective energy to the table, that we're excited to be there, we're smiling, and we're showing the child that it's meaningful. Now for the older kids, you know what they ask. They're going to ask, why do I have to do this? What's this all about? And so it's your job to have answers. And sometimes the answer can be really simple. I'm going to help your brain to work better. Oh, okay. It's not about always getting a better grade. That might help. It depends upon your relationship with the child. So mediation is very much about a very special type of dance between you and the child, your mind, what you know about the child, and the relationship you're building. It's a very relationship-based interaction. The last parameter that Reuven said must be there is transcendence, beyond the here and now. This isn't just about helping a child today. This is going to help him for the rest of his life. So this work that I'm doing with him today is extremely important for this child's future. It's not just about, oh, can I do better on the math test on Friday? Wait time, there are 12 parameters altogether, and those are just the first 3 that Reuven saw were universal. He saw those 3 happen with all the mothers and fathers and teachers from the many, many countries that were coming to Israel. The other piece that, boy, did I have to learn how to do this. I had to learn to be quiet, which I love that was expressed this morning, that we need time to think. Children who are struggling to get an answer in American schools, they're expected to instantly have their hand in the air and have an answer. And a teacher assumes the kid that never puts his hand up, never has an answer, isn't thinking so much. And so we've kind of set kids up for this with the way our schools work. This is called direct instruction, and there is a time and place for it. There is a place where we lecture. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm delivering direct instruction to you through a lecture method. So we're not having any give and take between us, except your smiles and your nods help me a lot. And staying awake, that you're awake, that really helps me too. So I really appreciate that. But when you're sitting one-on-one or with a small group of children, now we're going to ask a question and we actually wait. And it doesn't have to be long, 20 seconds. Sometimes it's only 3 to 5 seconds. But when the child realizes that you're going to wait. We had a little boy, he was a twin, and his brother was very, very bright, doing really well in school, and the other twin, the brother we worked with, really struggled with everything. All learning was difficult for him. So he never talked in school because his brother always knew the answers. So he never talked. And my mediator at my MindCap Center, her name is Anne, and she asked the boy a question. What do you see on this page? That's our leading question we always use. Just what do you see? And he's gawking around the room. He's doing this. He's just looking all over. And he finally caught Anne's eye contact. And he looked at her and he goes, "Oh, did you mean me?" She said, "Yeah, buddy, it's just you and me." But she waited on him, and then he looked at the page and he started to interact with her, and he started talking, and he realized this woman wants to know what I think. It was maybe the first time he had ever had that experience. The target that we're going after in all of our Feuerstein lessons are 28 specific thinking skills that Reuven called cognitive functions or thinking actions. And he put them into phases: input, elaboration, and output. So I'm going to have you learn some hand motions so you'll never forget. Ready? I want you to take your fingers and wiggle your fingers, okay, like this, and bring them into your head and say input, 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 input. When you get it to your head, give yourself a head massage. That's elaboration. I think about what I get in my brain. Now turn your hands around and say output, 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 output. Having children do those 3 motions and then tell them, do you know this is how your brain learns? This is how you learn. Information in, elaborate on it, think about it, and then output, telling people I know what I know. Brilliant. I had many, many advanced courses in education. I had multiple degrees, not my PhD yet, when I met Reuven, and no one had ever put thinking skills in these phases. So you have that handout in your packet as well, the 28 cognitive functions. That you may make 1 million copies and pass it out on the street. That is not copyrighted. So you're welcome to share those 28 thinking skills because those are pretty well known around the world. Reuven just put them into this beautiful 3 categories, which helps us understand them and helps us teach them to the children. So we actually teach the kids these. We start out with just a few for the little kids, and then as they age and work through the school or the clinic, wherever they're at, they just keep learning more of them until they know them all. Now I have a language for my thinking. We call it metacognition. When I can think about my thinking, the research indicates I get better test scores. And then I met Reuven, I'm like, okay, he gave me language for metacognition. Never had this before. I just had to guess at what is critical thinking. And now we have something called executive functions, but there's a whole bunch of opinions on what to name them. Reuven already has this work done for us. So things like systematic search, defining the problem, using precision and accuracy. I'm going to dive into 12 of those later. So enough about that for now. When Reuven first started working with the Holocaust survivors, he created an assessment system called the Learning Propensity Assessment Device. Trust me, Reuven never had any easy titles for anything. Everything was always long and big words. To take the training, any of you in this room could take this training. I'm exploring the possibility of offering it in Toronto, Canada this fall. So we want to bring people from around the world to learn this method. It is a one-on-one device or method. You would learn 16 different assessments that you give dynamically and diagnostically. So if you're really into diagnostic work, that you really want to dig into not only how does a child learn, but how should you mediate? Because you're measuring your level of mediation. How much do I have to mediate? And what kind of mediation do I need to deliver to this child to elicit change? Well, that blew me away. I'm like, this is a whole new way to look at how I diagnose learning problems. I need to assess myself. Yes, you look at yourself as well as the child. So it's called dynamic assessment. Here's two of the assessments. One is called the complex figure test. So if you've ever studied Andre Ray, if you're a psychologist, you maybe know the complex figure. It's a memory test. Reuven turned it into a dynamic method, because after we test your memory for that crazy shape on the right, it's very complex, right? We then teach you how to do it. We mediate, and we see if you're able to organize it, and how much work do I need to put into helping you learn how to organize it. And then we let you do it again and again and again. I have children will come up to me days later and say, I can still draw that. I still remember how to draw that. They're really proud that they learned how to recreate from memory this very complex figure. The other one is called the Raven's matrices. So you have 9 figures or designs, but one is missing. So you're looking for what's happening, what changes from left to right, top to bottom, to decide what is the answer that goes in the bottom right-hand corner. So we have pages and pages of those, and they're fascinating to do. And Reuven taught us how to do it dynamically. So we asked the child, is this about number? Or is it about color? And eventually we have the child telling us, oh, I needed to count. It's about the size of the design. And so we're mediating the thinking skills, the process. It isn't just about giving a test and seeing if the child can give you the answer. So here are some of the many applications I have personally participated in. Of course, I told you about brain injury, autism, hundreds of children with ADHD. This is a way to rewire the brain with no medication, and it works well for adults as well. Children that have been adopted. We have a lot of adoption in the United States, and sometimes those children continue to have cognitive issues, and the Feuerstein program can really help. And then just any type of trauma. Residential adult care. We have a nursing home in our city that uses the Feuerstein program for their adults of all ages. They aren't just elderly. They're people with schizophrenia. They're adults that had a serious brain injury and there's nowhere else for them to live, so they're in residential care. School-wide thinking skills. A whole school can learn Feuerstein, and everybody then has the same language. Chemotherapy-induced brain fog. I thought, 75% of all people who have chemotherapy get brain fog. 75%. Of that group, 35% of them, the brain fog never clears. And so they continue to not be able to think, and many of them are not able to go back to work. So you could be 45 years old and out of work because you had months of chemotherapy, and now my brain is in a deep fog. So we did a trial run with 8 chemotherapy patients at a center in my city, and all 8 of them had the brain fog clear. So now, yes, it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you. So I trained people on their staff, and they've been delivering the program now with their cancer patients for about 10 years. We've been using the program there. University freshmen, we did a program at a campus in my city. Sometimes kids leave high school, go on to university, and they drop out. I don't know if anybody has studied India's dropout rate for kids that go off to school, think they want to go to college, and they go, not for me. I had this professor, he was really hard. so I don't think it's for me. America has a huge dropout rate. We're like 40 to 50% of kids go off to college and, nah, not going to do it. And it's because they get intimidated and they don't have strategies. And so it's a fabulous program to use with incoming freshmen at a university who are at risk. Give them just one semester of Feuerstein and you'll turn them around and they'll stay in college. I worked in Cambodia and Thailand with child trafficking victims. These are children that were sold into sex slavery, and they were rescued out, horrific trauma, and so I trained their counselors to use the program with them. Starting in the year 2014, I started working with women coming out of prison with addiction. And we're working on this really hard in America, but it's still an issue. And so I've had over 400 clients that are in a residential program for 6 months work through the Feuerstein method. And I'm not talking about their addiction. I'm just saying, would you like your brain to work better? And most of them had an addiction because they had trauma first. They didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I want to be an alcoholic, or, you know, I'm going to start using meth or heroin. It was usually in an attempt to mask the pain from some type of trauma that they had had. And so what I've discovered is this program is a very integral part. The director agreed, and she never wants it to leave. And so we're working at creating a program or it's a binder, a curriculum, I'll say it that way, that is for adults with addiction that are in recovery. So if India has anything like that, I have a curriculum ready to go. It's an 8-week program. This is Declan. Declan was an identical twin, and he and his brother were developing quite nicely. And then at 18 months, only Declan acquired leukemia. And he began chemotherapy, and he quickly fell behind his brother, seriously falling behind his brother's development. That's his mother, Amy, behind, and Amy heard about this program, so we started working with Declan. He's now about 9 years old. In this picture, he's only 3, and Declan has now caught up with his brother, Logan. This is, yes, again, very wonderful. This is a young man named Philip. If you ever read any of Feuerstein's research, you'll read about a young man named Alex. That was when he was a minor. He's now in his 30s, lives in England, has his own apartment, and has a job. The shocking news about Philip is he had half his brain removed. It's called a hemispherectomy. And it is a little more common now, but in 1988, it was very, very rare. He was one of the first in the world. His entire left hemisphere seizured constantly. It never stopped. So he was on extremely strong anticonvulsants. His little brother saw his medicine on the counter one day and popped all of them into his mouth and swallowed them all. He didn't speak for 3 days. And that's when the mother knew that's why Philip wasn't talking. It wasn't because of the seizures, it was because of the medication. She was only able to find one pediatric neurosurgeon that was willing to do the surgery. And they said, oh, he'll be terribly mentally handicapped, he'll never walk or talk. And he began talking days after the surgery. He was only 8 years old when they removed the left hemisphere, and that's in charge of speech. It holds the Broca's and the Wernicke's area, which is in charge of comprehending and using speech. But yet he spoke. And let me tell you, this guy can have quite a conversation with you. He's a ton of fun. And so he and I are standing in Prague, and he's giving a presentation. I'm holding the paper for him because his right hand still doesn't work very well, but he talks and walks. Now he walks with a limp, and you know that he's had some brain trauma because his right hand doesn't work, and he, walks with a bit of a limp. But as soon as you start talking with him, he has this great sense of humor. He has a job. He lives in his own apartment. What? With half a brain? So if he can have a fulfilled life, I think we all can learn from Philip. also known as Alex. Yeah, I know, another amazing kid. I thought you might enjoy learning about Grayson. Grayson was brought to us by his mother. She's a lawyer in our city, and she had been taking him to TMS treatments, transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a fascinating method. It helps with deep depression. They think it may help with also addiction, and they're exploring, could it help with autism? Well, Grayson had a lot of anger and a lot of depression, and he's not very verbal. He doesn't speak a lot. And here in this picture, he would have been about 23 years old at the time. Carla, the other woman in the picture, is now the director of the MindCap Center. She's the speech pathologist that took over when I took this position with the Institute. Grayson's story is fascinating because he's the only client that I have EEG results for. Now, if you look at those colored lines, you see there's some hills on the left, and then they kind of go flat with a couple little bumps here and there. Your EEGs, if any of you took one, you would have all these hills in the middle. You would have all these bumps in the middle showing activity in that part of the brain. Well, this was August 26, 2019. And the mother brought him to us, and we worked with him for about 3 months, and she took him back to Dr. Lazoff and said, do another EEG. And he said, well, why would I do that? Well, we've not been doing any TMS, because she stopped the TMS and brought him to us. And she said, I'll pay for it, do it. She's a woman that can do that. And so Dr. Lazoff said, okay, we'll do another EEG. Do you see the hills in the middle? Do you see all the bumps, particularly the central zone and down in the parietal zone, the yellow? All of a sudden, we've got all these hills. So we kept working with him, and then she took him back again. Well, first, Dr. Lazoff asked, what have you been doing? Because when he saw these results, he was blown away. He said there shouldn't be all this new activity. And he, by that point, had had about 30 hours. So we're not talking years of Feuerstein. We're talking 30 hours. So he came, I think, twice a week. And he had one-on-one mediation with Vicky and Carla, the OT in the speech path. So here's what an EEG, here are the places in the brain that are tested. And here are all the places that Grayson showed increased activity. So this is like looking down on top of the brain. The frontal lobes, the central lobes, the parietal lobes, and of course the occipital lobes as well. She took him back then the next March, on March 22nd. Now look what the central zone and the frontal lobes, look at all the bumps and the hills now, the peaks that are happening in his EEG now. Crazy. And again, the doctor's like, what are you doing? So he and I started talking more and having a beautiful conversation about this method. This is Tyler. Tyler was driving home late one night. He was a truck driver, and he was maybe 25 years old, and fell asleep. And his car ran off the road, and a fence post went all the way through his head. And he lived, because it went through his neck, underneath his chin right here, and came out the back of his head. So they transported him by helicopter to the hospital. And about 6 months later, he walked into the MindCap Center. And you can tell he's had a lot of reconstructive surgery. And this is now 3 years later. He got married. There's his wife. And so Tyler has a very, very full life. Now, we only worked with Tyler for 1 week. He lives 5 hours away from us. But his mother, his mom there with him, paid for him to come to MindCap because she heard about the work we were doing. And we saw changes, and he saw changes in 1 week's time. We do intensives where you use Feuerstein for 5 hours a day. Crazy, right? So you come and you start, you have a 9 o'clock session and a 10:15 and an 11:30. You put 15-minute breaks between your sessions. You go home, have a big lunch, maybe take a swim at the hotel because people are coming from out of town for intensives. They come back in the afternoon and they work with different people every hour. Julie, Vicky, Anne, Carla, Jeannie. And all of us are doing a different Feuerstein method with them, but we're all targeting the same cognitive functions and we're all using mediation. This method of getting to know the child, staying very relaxed, calm, asking questions, giving wait time, allowing the child to think before they answer. It's a very, very respectful method. This is Carla. You remember COVID? Changed our life, right? Changed our life. COVID changed the whole world. And Carla developed what's called long COVID. Now, Carla is a very experienced practicing mental health counselor who could not work because she had such terrible brain fog. This is Anne, who I've talked about already. And Anne already knew Carla, started working with her, and you can see Carla is crying. She gave us permission to use this picture because Carla was trained in the Feuerstein method. And she knew she should know these answers, but her brain was so in a fog from the COVID, she couldn't think. And so we worked with her, and we brought her, she came out of the fog. So she was hospitalized in October of 2025. The brain fog was so bad. And the doctors had absolutely nothing to tell her of what to do. So her mother called me, knows me, called and said, Jeannie, can you help? I said, absolutely. We got to start working with her all the way. We got to get her on a really clean diet, no sugar, no gluten, cut down on carbs, get her on a really clean diet, add omega-3, B complex. Those are things the brain needs. Make sure she's drinking a lot of water. The brain has to be hydrated. So they started doing all of that and brought her to MindCap. And this is her. 4 months later, she went back to work, doing her work as a counselor. Yeah. You can tell how happy she is. That's in her office, which just happened to be across the street from our MindCap Center. So Dr. Rabbi Rafi Feuerstein is our new president of the Institute. And you can see some people you might recognize in that top picture. That's me at one of the Alpha Omega centers. And the children are with me in that other picture. And these are kids that at first glance you would think, oh, they're going to have trouble learning. But they are learning because they have mediators. They have teachers that are taught how to mediate. So I see the Feuerstein program certainly as a gift to humanity and kind of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow because I didn't realize I needed it or wanted it because I didn't even know it existed. And when I heard him speak, then I realized this is something I've been looking for my whole life. It's like going shopping and you find that pair of shoes, ladies, right, that you didn't know you needed. So when I found Reuben, I'm like, okay, this is a method that I need. So I want to welcome you because you now know about the Feuerstein program. So welcome to the Feuerstein program, to the Feuerstein family.